The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. My name is Kareem Al-Nouri, and I never imagined I'd be sharing this story. Not here, not this way. For most of my life, I was certain I had all the answers. As a respected religious leader, I taught, guided, and upheld traditions with fervent passion and immovable conviction. But none of that prepared me for the moment when everything I believed in collapsed under the weight of one desperate prayer. This story is not about religion, but about encounter. It's about a God who met me not in my strength, but in my brokenness. And it's about how that encounter changed everything. If you're here searching, struggling, or simply trying to make sense of life's turning points, I invite you to walk with me through this testimony. Perhaps, just like me, you will find that answers don't always come from where we expect, but from the quiet places where our soul finally cries out, "Stay until the end." There's a reason you're here. It started on a humid afternoon in early May. My daughter Layla, who had been studying architecture at a university in Louisiana, called me with worry in her voice. She told me heavy rains had caused severe flooding across campus, and authorities were asking students to move to higher ground. At first, I assumed it would pass, like many storms had. But this one didn't. That was the last call I received from her. After that, the line went silent. I tried to reach her again and again. Nothing. No answer. My heart started pounding in a way I hadn't felt before, something deeper than fear. It was dread. And in that dread, something began to unravel inside me. I paced the room, clutched my prayer beads, and whispered words I had spoken for decades. But they felt empty, hollow, as if they were bouncing off the walls. That night, my house wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. I had always taught others that faith was the anchor of the soul. I preached about trust in divine will, about endurance, about not questioning what was decreed. But when it was my daughter, my only child, missing in a flood with no contact, no updates, and growing media panic, all my teachings seemed to mock me. The verses I knew by heart faded into meaningless syllables. My hands shook, my lips moved, but no prayer came out. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't know how to pray. Not really. I knew how to recite, how to instruct, how to perform. But plead? Desperately? Honestly? That was new to me, and terrifying. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was dissolving. I tried everything. I contacted embassy officials, university staff, local news outlets. Each hour that passed without word made the silence louder. I felt like I was being swallowed into a pit I didn't know existed. That night, I fell to my knees, not because I was holy, but because I had nothing left. No answers, no comfort, just silence and despair. I had never cried in prayer before, not truly. But that night I wept, not just for my daughter, but for my soul. For the first time, I whispered into the dark, "If you are truly out there, if there is a God who listens beyond what I've known, please, please save my daughter." It wasn't formal. It wasn't polished. It was raw. I didn't even know who I was praying to anymore. And that's when it happened. I can't explain it. I didn't see visions or hear trumpets. But I felt something, an overwhelming presence. The kind that silences everything. The walls, the ceiling, even my racing heart. It all seemed to stand still. And then, a warmth. A stillness that didn't belong in that stormy, agonizing night. I lifted my head and felt a strange sense of peace, like a whisper in the silence. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if it was real, but it was enough to keep me from falling apart. The next morning, I turned on the television. The scenes were harrowing. Cars submerged, buildings swallowed by water, helicopters airlifting survivors. But then a headline caught my eye. Students rescued from submerged campus hall. I held my breath as images flashed across the screen. A group of students being led to safety, some carried, some barely walking. And then, in one frame, a face I knew as well as my own. Layla, soaked, pale, weak, but alive. I dropped to the ground, sobbing. Relief poured out of me like a flood of its own. But something else stirred too, that strange peace from the night before. It hadn't left. It was growing. An hour later, I received a phone call from a volunteer at a nearby church. She told me they were the ones who had reached Layla's building. It had been completely cut off, but their team had formed a human chain to pull the students out one by one. She said Layla had clung to one rescuer and whispered, "I wasn't alone. He was with me." I asked who. The woman said, "She mentioned Jesus." I froze. I didn't know what to say. My world spun again. Not from pain this time, but from something unfamiliar. Could it be? No, it couldn't. And yet deep inside me, I knew I had touched something true. That day marked the beginning of my undoing. Not in the sense of losing faith, but of losing the version of faith I had built my whole life around. The version that had no room for questions, no space for grace, no tolerance for anything outside its rigid walls. Something had entered my life that didn't ask for permission. It simply came, in the silence, in the breaking, in the drowning. And now, I could no longer ignore it. I couldn't stop thinking about what the woman had said, that my daughter had whispered Jesus was with me. The sentence echoed in my mind like a melody I had never heard, but somehow remembered. I told myself she must have been disoriented, traumatized, reaching for meaning. But deep down, I knew it wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. The night before, when I cried out with no expectation of being heard, someone had heard me. And not just me. Layla too. My chest felt heavy, not from fear this time, but from the weight of a truth I had spent my life denying. I tried to brush it off, but the more I resisted, the more it clung to me. It wasn't an idea. It was a presence, gentle, firm, undeniable. Layla called me the next day. Her voice was weak but calm. She told me what happened, how the waters had risen so fast they barely had time to react, how she and the other students took refuge in an upstairs lecture hall, how the darkness and panic were overwhelming. She told me about the silence right before she lost consciousness, and the figure she saw. A man, glowing faintly, extending his hand toward her. She said, he didn't say his name, but I knew who he was. I held the phone in silence, every muscle in my body frozen. I wanted to deny it, to argue, to find a natural explanation, but I couldn't, because I had seen him too. Not visibly, but undeniably. That night, in my room, when the world collapsed, something, or rather, someone, entered my darkness. I didn't see a face or hear a voice then, but the presence had weight, not a physical weight, but a spiritual one. And now, my daughter, halfway across the world, was describing the same presence, the same peace, the same rescue. What are the odds? I asked myself that, again and again, but reason had no answer that could satisfy my soul. This wasn't probability, this was providence, and I knew it was time to confront the truth I had run from for decades. I booked a flight in secret. No one could know, not my colleagues, not my community, not even my extended family. I packed lightly, just one bag, and left without telling a soul. It felt like betrayal, like treason, but it also felt like salvation. Every moment in that airport, on the plane, during the layover, my heart raced, not just because of the fear of being discovered, but because of what awaited me on the other side. When I landed in the US, the air felt different, lighter, as if even the atmosphere knew I was stepping into something sacred. The taxi driver dropped me off in front of a modest house on the edge of town. I saw the wooden cross hanging on the door before I saw her. When Layla opened the door and fell into my arms, everything collapsed. Years of distance, walls of ideology, generations of tradition, all of it melted under the weight of love. I wept openly, shamelessly, not because she had survived, but because something greater than survival had occurred. We sat on the couch and said nothing for a long time, just silence, safe, healing silence. And when we finally spoke, it wasn't about theology, it wasn't about doctrine, it was about what we both saw, what we both felt, what we could no longer deny. We had been visited by the same Savior. That week was unlike any other in my life. We stayed inside, no visitors, no calls, just the two of us. We prayed, not with scripted words, but with raw hearts. We opened a Bible together for the first time. Slowly, hesitantly, we read the words of Jesus, verse by verse, and with every word, something inside me shifted. He wasn't who I had thought he was. He wasn't the enemy. He wasn't a blasphemer. He wasn't a threat. He was familiar, like someone I had somehow always known, but never dared to meet. And now that I had, I couldn't turn away. By the end of the week, I knew I couldn't go back. Not just geographically, but spiritually. I couldn't return to my old life, to my old identity, pretending nothing had happened. The phone rang one morning, someone from back home asking why I had disappeared. I gave vague answers, but I knew the time of hiding would end eventually. After I hung up, Layla looked at me and asked, "What now?" I stared at her, my chest tight, and said the only thing I could. "We begin again, here, with truth." She didn't ask what that meant. She just nodded, because she already knew. We both did. We moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside town. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a creaky old balcony. But to me, it was a sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I was living without a title, without a congregation, without the weight of being the example. I was simply a father, a seeker, a man trying to understand what had happened. The church that had helped rescue Layla continued to check in, but they didn't pressure us. They didn't demand declarations or confessions. They simply brought food, offered quiet support, and prayed for us, softly, humbly. And that, more than any sermon, spoke to me. It disarmed me, because it was love without condition. One woman, Grace, brought us a new blanket one evening. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You are not alone here." I thanked her, but the words stuck. You are not alone. I had spent my entire adult life surrounded by people, and yet I had never felt so alone as when I was the Imam, always performing, always guarding, always defending. Now, stripped of all that, I was finally beginning to feel seen, accepted, not for what I taught, but for who I was, for what I had endured. That winter was cold, but inside our little home, warmth began to grow. It wasn't just Layla's presence. It wasn't even just the safety. It was something else, something holy. Every evening we read the Gospels together. Sometimes we would weep, sometimes we would sit in silence, and sometimes we would pause, struck by a sentence we had never read before, one that seemed to be written just for us. I began to see Jesus not through the lens of arguments or religious rivalry, but through his own words, his gentleness, his authority, his healing, his love. I had never encountered such mercy, not in the books I studied, not in the sermons I gave, not even in the rituals I memorized. This was different. This was alive. And I was beginning to realize I had never truly lived until now. Still, the fear lingered. I knew what would happen if word got out. My family back home, my fellow scholars, my former students, they would see me as lost, as a traitor, as someone who abandoned everything he stood for. But the truth was, I hadn't abandoned anything. I had been found, and once found, how could I return to being lost again? I struggled with that, the guilt, the shame, the fear, not of God but of people, of opinions, of rejection. It became a daily battle, a war between truth and tradition, between love and loyalty, between freedom and fear. One night Layla looked at me and said, "Do you believe you were saved too?" Her question hit like a hammer. I didn't know how to answer. My lips trembled, my throat tightened, and then I nodded. "Yes," I whispered, "but I don't know what to do with that yet." She smiled, not with triumph but with tenderness. She took my hand and said, "We'll figure it out together." And we did, slowly, one day at a time. Some days I was strong, others I could barely pray. But every time I closed my eyes and whispered, even just silently, I felt that same presence, the one who came when I called. I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living halfway. I couldn't pretend to be what I no longer was. I thought about disappearing completely, changing my name, moving again, cutting ties. But something inside me resisted, not out of pride, but out of integrity. I didn't want to hide, not forever. One day, people would ask, and I would have to tell them. Maybe not all at once, maybe not publicly, but I owed the truth to someone. If not to them, then at least to myself, and to the one who answered me, who met me not when I was holy, but when I was hopeless. We began attending church, not regularly at first, but cautiously. We would sit in the back near the exit, ready to leave if it became too much. But it never did. It was simple, honest. Songs sung with broken voices, prayers whispered with trembling lips. People who didn't pretend to have all the answers. That moved me. It wasn't performance, it was presence. And that presence was what had saved me in the first place. One day during worship, I closed my eyes and saw him again. Not visually, but vividly. And the words came back. You called me, and I came. That was enough. That was everything. The days became lighter, even though the path was still uncertain. I began volunteering quietly at the church, organizing books, translating texts, sometimes just cleaning. It felt good to serve without being seen, without being the authority, just being useful. Every time someone thanked me, I felt undeserving, but I also felt whole. Something had begun to heal inside me, not instantly, not magically, but deeply. I started journaling at night, writing everything I couldn't say aloud. The fears, the doubts, the gratitude, the guilt. Most nights I ended the entries the same way. Thank you for not turning away when I finally turned to you. Because that was how I saw it now. He had been waiting. And when I finally looked up, he was already there. There were still moments when I trembled. Still dreams that brought back the mosque, the sermons, the pressure, the judgment. Still moments when I wondered if I had made it all up. If I had simply cracked under the weight of grief. But then I would hear Layla reading from the gospel in the living room, softly, as she studied, and that doubt would melt like morning fog under sunlight. She believed, not because I told her to, but because she had met him too. And I believed because he had reached us both. When I tried to doubt, I couldn't deny what had happened. It was too real, too consistent, and too full of peace to be a lie. I never told the full story to my former community. But one day I received a message from a young man who had once studied under me. He said he had heard rumors and asked if I was okay. I replied with something short but honest. I am not who I used to be, but I am finally at peace. He didn't respond. Maybe he was shocked. Maybe he was disappointed. Maybe he didn't know what to say. But I had no regrets. I no longer needed validation from those who only knew a version of me that was incomplete. The real me was still unfolding, broken, rebuilding, learning to breathe again. And this time, I wasn't building alone. One afternoon, Layla and I were sitting on the balcony when she turned to me and asked, "Do you miss it?" I didn't need clarification. She meant the old life, the rituals, the robes, the reverence. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "I miss the structure, but not the silence." She nodded. We understood each other. The silence we used to live in was the kind that buried questions and glorified appearances. But now we had a different silence, one filled with honesty, with presence, with grace. I would take that silence over applause any day, because in it, I found God. We started praying together, not just over meals or before sleep, but spontaneously, on walks, in the car, during storms. Prayer had changed. It was no longer performance. It was communion. I didn't always know what to say. Sometimes I just sat in quiet awe. Sometimes I asked questions with no answers. But every time I felt heard. Not as an imam, not as a scholar, just as Kareem, a man, a father, a soul who once called into the void and was answered with light. And now, I carried that light inside me. Not because I deserved it, but because he gave it freely. That, I came to understand, was grace. 50 days passed since that night. I marked it on the calendar, not as a religious holiday, but as a personal resurrection. The day everything changed. The day I stopped pretending and started living. I celebrated it quietly, with tea and prayer. I thanked him not just for saving Layla, but for saving me from myself, from my pride, my blindness, my fear. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever go public with my testimony beyond this written form, but I do know this. I can never go back. I can't unknow what I've come to know. I can't unsee what I've seen, and I won't apologize for the miracle that found me. If you're still watching, still listening, maybe it's not by accident. Maybe you're where I was, at the edge, in the dark, questioning everything. If so, I want to say this: you're not alone. And if you dare to whisper, even a word, into the unknown, you may find, as I did, that He is already there, waiting, listening, ready. You don't need perfect words. You don't need titles. You don't need rituals. You just need to be honest. That's all I had. And it was enough. Enough to bring Him to me. Enough to bring my daughter out of the water. Enough to change everything. Forever. Maybe you didn't expect to hear this today. Maybe you just stumbled onto this video, unsure why you clicked. But now that you've heard my story, I want to ask you something simple and real. Have you ever cried out in the dark? Have you ever whispered a prayer you weren't sure anyone would hear? If so, then you already understand what this is about. This is not just my story. It might be yours too. A journey from silence to voice, from performance to presence, from religion to relationship. And if you feel something stirring inside you, something you can't explain, don't ignore it. That's how it started for me, and that's how lives begin to change. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to fix yourself before you come to Him. Just come, speak honestly, ask your questions, cry if you must. But don't stay silent anymore. I am not here to preach a system. I am here to share a Savior, one who doesn't wait for the righteous, but comes for the desperate, the broken, the ones who no longer know how to pray. If you feel like that, you're not disqualified. You're ready. And if He came for me, I know He can come for you too. So if something in this story touched you, if you felt seen, if your heart felt even a flicker of recognition, don't let it end here. Inscribe this moment, mark it in your soul, and take your next step. Inscreva-se no canal e siga Jesus. Subscribe now, not just to this content, but to a journey of truth, a journey of grace, a journey of real peace. You don't have to walk alone. We're here, this community is here, and more importantly, He is here. Leave a comment below and tell your story, even if it's just one sentence. Sometimes speaking your truth is the first act of courage, and you never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. If you're new here, I invite you to watch the other stories on this channel. Real people, real encounters, real hope. And if you've been walking this journey for a while, then share this video with someone who needs to know that God still shows up, especially in the silence. Support this channel by becoming a member if you can. Every contribution helps us reach more hearts like yours, people who are one prayer away from a breakthrough. But whether you give or not, know this: your presence matters, your heart matters, and your journey matters. This is not the end of the road. This is just the beginning of something eternal. From my heart to yours, thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being willing to sit with my story. I pray that the same peace that entered my life that night would enter yours, even now. And if you ever doubt again, if the darkness starts to close in, just remember what He told me. You called me, and I came. That promise wasn't just for me, it's for you too. Until next time, stay close, stay honest, stay open, and never forget you are not alone. God bless you. I'll see you again very soon.